The old house stood on a hill overlooking the town, its darkened windows like vacant eyes staring out at the world. We had moved in a week ago, seeking refuge and a fresh start after everything. Just me and my little Lily, barely 6 months old, her sweet, gurgling laughter the only melody in the unsettling silence of our new home. The first night, it was just the creaks and groans of an old house settling. I told myself it was the wind whistling through the eaves, the branches of the ancient oak outside tapping against the window pane. Lily slept soundly in her crib beside my bed, her soft breaths, a comforting rhythm in the darkness. But then the whispers started. Faint at first, like the rustling of dry leaves just beyond the door. I'd hold my breath, straining to hear, but they would fade away, leaving me questioning my own sanity. Sleepless nights became the norm, my ears constantly attuned to the slightest sound. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in bruised purples and oranges, Lily started to fuss. I picked her up, cradling her close, humming a lullaby. That's when I saw it, a shadow, just at the edge of my vision, flickering in the hallway. When I turned my head, it was gone. Just my tired eyes, I murmured, but a cold dread began to coil in my stomach. The whispers grew bolder, no longer confined to the periphery. They seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, a low, sibilant murmur that spoke of sorrow and loss. Lily would often stare at the empty corners of the room, her wide blue eyes filled with an unreadable fear. One night, I awoke to a chilling stillness. Lily wasn't beside me. Panic seized me, a cold fist clenching my heart. Lily? My voice was a choked whisper in the oppressive silence. Then I heard it, a soft, rhythmic rocking coming from downstairs. My blood ran cold. I hadn't put her in her rocking chair. Clutching a heavy candlestick, I crept down the creaking stairs. The air grew heavy, thick with a cloying sweetness that made my head spin. In the dim moonlight filtering through the grimy windows, I saw the rocking chair moving gently back and forth. And in it was a figure, tall and gaunt, shrouded in shadow. It hummed a tuneless melody. Its back was to me, but I could sense its attention fixed on something in its lap. Who are you? My voice trembled, the candlestick shaking in my hand. The figure slowly turned. Its face was a blur in the darkness, but I could make out 2 luminous eyes that burned with an ancient malevolence. And in its arms, nestled as if asleep, was Lily. A silent scream tore through me. I lunged forward, the candlestick raised, but the figure was impossibly fast. It glided across the room. Lily clutched tightly to its chest and vanished into the darkness of the hallway. I chased after it, my bare feet pounding on the cold wooden floor. The whispers intensified, swirling around me like a suffocating shroud, urging me to stop, to give up. But I couldn't. This was my baby. The hallway stretched endlessly, the shadows dancing and mocking. I could hear Lily whimpering, a small, terrified sound that spurred me onward. The air grew colder, and a bone-chilling draft seemed to emanate from the end of the hall, where a door stood slightly ajar. I pushed it open, and the sight that greeted me made my breath catch in my throat. The room was filled with an eerie luminescence, and in the center, the gaunt figure stood before a large, ornate mirror. It was rocking Lily gently, its luminous eyes fixed on her reflection. As I watched, horrified, the reflection in the mirror began to change. It wasn't Lily anymore. It was a small, pale child with hollow eyes and a vacant stare. The figure in the mirror smiled, a slow, chilling curve of its lips. Then, it reached out and touched the reflection. Lily screamed. I didn't hesitate. I charged, the candlestick connecting with a sickening thud against the back of the figure's head. It staggered, releasing Lily, who fell to the floor with a soft cry. I scooped her up, holding her tightly against my chest, her small body trembling. The figure turned to me, its blurred face contorted in rage. The luminous eyes burned brighter, and the whispers reached a deafening crescendo. But I didn't run. I held my baby close, my gaze locked on the monstrous figure before me. A fierce, primal protectiveness surged through me. This was my child, and I would fight whatever darkness this house held to keep her safe. The fight was long and terrifying, a blur of shadows and screams, and the desperate strength of a mother's love. I don't remember all of it, but I remember the feeling of Lily's small hand clutching my finger, her tiny breaths against my neck. That was all the strength I needed. Eventually, the whispers faded, the shadows receded, the luminous eyes dimmed and finally extinguished. The gaunt figure collapsed into a pile of dust, leaving behind only a lingering chill and the faint scent of decay. We left that house before dawn, never looking back. Lily slept soundly in my arms, her terror finally replaced by peaceful slumber. But even now, years later, whenever I hold her close, I can still feel the echo of the whispers, a chilling reminder of the night we faced the darkness together, just me and my baby. And I know, with a mother's unwavering certainty, that the bond forged in that terror is stronger than any evil the world might hold. The empty floors, the fluorescent lights hummed above me, a monotonous drone that was the only constant companion on my long night shift. I worked as a security guard at the old Sterling building downtown. By day, it was a bustling hub of law firms and accounting offices. But from midnight to 8 in the morning, it was a tomb of empty desks, silent computers, and shadows that stretched and danced in the corners of my vision. Tonight felt particularly heavy. A thick fog had rolled in off the river, clinging to the city like a shroud. Through the grimy windows of the security office, the streetlights glowed with a hazy, spectral light, and the usual distant sirens and city noises were muffled, replaced by an unnerving silence. I was on the 10th floor for my hourly rounds. The plush carpet of the Miller and Zoas law firm absorbed the sound of my footsteps, making me feel even more isolated. Each office door was dark and silent, the names on the frosted glass: Thompson, Davies and Lee, Al-Hassan and Associates, taking on a strange, almost ominous quality in the dim emergency lighting. I checked the locks, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, illuminating dust motes swirling in the still air. Everything was as it should be, secure, empty, yet a familiar prickle of unease was beginning to creep up my spine. It wasn't anything specific, not at first. Just a feeling, the kind you get when you sense someone watching you, even when you know you're alone. I'd worked the night shift here for over a year, and the silence had never truly bothered me before. I'd always found a strange sort of peace in the stillness of the sleeping building, but lately, there had been things. Small things, easily dismissed, a door that seemed to creak open just a fraction, the faint scent of something stale and metallic in the air, a fleeting glimpse of movement in a darkened hallway. I'd told myself it was just fatigue, the tricks your mind plays on you in the dead of night. But tonight the feeling was stronger, more insistent. As I reached the end of the hallway near the fire escape, I heard it, a soft scraping sound coming from the other side of the heavy metal door. It was faint, like something lightly dragging across the concrete floor outside. I froze, my flashlight beam fixed on the door. The sound stopped. I held my breath, listening intently. The only sound was the distant hum of the building's ventilation system. Maybe it was just the wind, I thought. The fog could be playing tricks with the sounds outside. I reached for the handle, my hand hesitating for a moment before gripping the cold metal. I pulled the door open slowly, the hinges groaning in protest. The fire escape was shrouded in the thick fog. Visibility was near zero. I swept my flashlight beam across the landing. Empty. Just the damp concrete and the swirling mist. I stepped out onto the landing, the cold, damp air clinging to my skin. The scraping sound was gone. I listened for a moment longer, but heard nothing but the muffled sounds of the city. Shrugging it off, I chalked it up to the fog and headed back inside, pulling the heavy door shut behind me. As the latch clicked into place, I could have sworn I heard it again, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper, just on the other side of the metal. I paused, my hand still on the handle. Had I imagined it, the silence of the empty floor pressed in on me, amplifying every tiny sound, every flicker of my imagination. I continued my rounds, trying to shake off the feeling of unease. But it lingered, a cold knot in my stomach. On the 12th floor, near the old storage rooms, I noticed something else. The door to room 12B, which I had specifically checked and locked on my last round, was now slightly ajar. My heart skipped a beat. I approached cautiously, my flashlight beam focused on the gap. A sliver of darkness stared back at me. "Security?" I called out, my voice echoing in the silent hallway. No response. I pushed the door open slowly, my hand instinctively reaching for the pepper spray on my belt. The room was small and cluttered, filled with old files and forgotten office supplies. Dust motes danced in the beam of my flashlight. Everything seemed to be in its place, but then I saw it. On the far wall, scrawled in what looked like dried ink, or perhaps something darker, were 3 symbols: They weren't letters or numbers, but strange, angular shapes that seemed to writhe on the pale plaster. I had never seen them before. A sudden chill filled the room, a cold that had nothing to do with the outside fog. The air felt heavy, charged with something I couldn't name. The hum of the fluorescent lights above seemed to falter, flickering erratically. I backed out of the room slowly, my eyes fixed on the strange symbols. As I reached the doorway, I heard a soft rustling sound from within the room, like paper being disturbed. I raised my flashlight, my hand trembling slightly. Who's there? Silence. Only the faint rustling. Closer now. I didn't wait for an answer. I backed away quickly, pulling the door shut and locking it. My mind raced. Had someone broken in? But there were no signs of forced entry. And what were those symbols? I fumbled for my radio, my fingers clumsy with adrenaline. Security to dispatch. Do you copy? A crackling voice responded. Dispatch here, go ahead. I think there might be someone in the building. 12th floor, room 12B. And there's something strange in there. Strange how? The dispatcher's voice was calm, professional. Symbols on the wall. I don't know what they are. And I heard noises. Copy that. Stay where you are. I'm calling the authorities. Stay where I was, alone on the empty 12th floor, with a room that felt suddenly wrong? I didn't wait. I moved quickly towards the elevators, my flashlight beam darting nervously down the silent hallway. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming now, a palpable presence in the darkness. The air seemed to grow colder with each step. As I reached the elevator bank, I heard it again. The soft scraping sound, closer this time, seemingly coming from the end of the hallway. I whirled around, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, but saw nothing. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, the empty car beckoning. I stepped inside quickly, hitting the button for the ground floor with a trembling finger. As the elevator began its descent, the lights flickered again, plunging the car into momentary darkness. When they flickered back on, I saw it. Scratched into the polished steel of the elevator wall, right beside my hand, was one of the same strange angular symbols I had seen in room 12B. My breath hitched in my throat. It couldn't be. I had just been on the 12th floor. How could that symbol have appeared here, in the elevator, in the space of a few minutes? The elevator continued its slow descent, each passing floor feeling like a step further into something unknown and terrifying. I was no longer just a security guard on a lonely night shift. I was trapped in a silent, empty building that seemed to be waking up, and the whispers were starting to become clearer. Elevator doors slid open on the ground floor, and I practically stumbled out, my senses on high alert. The lobby, usually dimly lit but familiar, now felt vast and menacing. The shadows seemed deeper, the silence more profound. I kept my back to the wall, my flashlight beam sweeping across the marble floor and the empty reception desk. The air here felt different too, heavier, almost stagnant. The faint metallic scent I'd noticed earlier was stronger now, tinged with something else, something faintly sweet and cloying. I moved towards the main entrance, my hand still gripping the pepper spray. I needed to get outside, to feel the relative normalcy of the fog-shrouded street. But as I reached the heavy glass doors, I saw it. More of the strange symbols. They were etched into the inside of the glass, almost invisible unless the light caught them just right. They seemed to pulse faintly in the hazy glow of the streetlights outside. Panic began to claw at the edges of my control. This wasn't just my imagination. This was real. Something was happening in this building. Something I didn't understand. The radio crackled to life. Security. Police are en route. ETA, 5 minutes. Are you still there? Yeah, I managed, my voice barely a whisper. I'm in the lobby. But there are more of those symbols down here. On the front doors. Copy that. Stay put. Stay put. Easy for them to say. I felt a desperate urge to run, to get as far away from the Sterling building as possible. But a strange sense of duty, ingrained from months of routine, kept me rooted to the spot. This was my job. I was supposed to secure the building, even if the building itself felt like it was turning against me. I moved away from the doors, my flashlight beam dancing nervously. I needed to find a defensible position, somewhere I could wait for the police to arrive. The security office, with its locked door and surveillance monitors, seemed like the safest bet. As I made my way back across the lobby, I heard a new sound. It was faint, but distinct. A soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingernails drumming on a hard surface. It seemed to be coming from the direction of the main stairwell. The stairwell was dimly lit by motion sensor lights that flickered on and off as I moved closer. The tapping continued, a steady, unsettling beat that echoed in the vast space. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling slightly. Silence. The tapping stopped. Then, after a moment, it started again, closer now, seemingly coming from the landing just above. I hesitated at the foot of the stairs. The darkness above seemed to beckon, promising answers I didn't want to find. But the tapping was insistent, drawing me in. Slowly, cautiously, I started to ascend the stairs, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. Each step creaked under my weight, the sound amplified in the silence. The tapping continued, growing louder as I climbed. When I reached the landing, the motion sensor light flickered on, illuminating the empty space. The tapping had stopped again. I swept my flashlight beam around. Nothing. Just the cold stone of the walls and the closed doors of the ground floor offices. Then I heard it, a soft whisper, right behind me. "Are you looking for something?" I whirled around, my heart leaping into my throat. Standing in the shadows at the top of the next flight of stairs was a figure. Tall and gaunt, it was shrouded in darkness, its features obscured. But I could feel its gaze on me, cold and intense. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking. I raised my pepper spray, my finger tightening on the trigger. The figure didn't answer. It simply stood there, silent and still, a dark silhouette against the faint light filtering from the upper floors. Then, it began to move, slowly, deliberately. It started to descend the stairs towards me. The tapping sound started again, this time louder, more frantic, as if the figure itself was making the noise. Fear, cold and paralyzing, gripped me. This wasn't a break-in. This was something else. Something wrong. I backed away, my flashlight beam shaking. The figure continued its descent, its form slowly taking shape in the dim light. It was tall and thin, its limbs unnaturally long and spindly. Its head was tilted at an odd angle, and its movements were jerky and unnatural. As it drew closer, I could finally make out its face, or what was left of it. The features were gaunt and stretched, the skin pale and translucent. Its eyes were dark and sunken, and its mouth was open in a silent, gaping maw. And its fingers were long and bony, and it was these that were making the tapping sound as they dragged against the stone steps. It reached the landing, its gaze fixed on me. The tapping stopped. A low, guttural sound emanated from its open mouth, a sound that sent a shiver of primal fear down my spine. I didn't hesitate. I unleashed a blast of pepper spray, aiming for its face. The figure recoiled slightly, a hissing sound escaping its throat. But it didn't stop. It continued to move towards me. Its unnatural gait changed. The pepper spray had no effect. Desperation surged through me. I turned and fled, scrambling back down the stairs, the tapping sound echoing behind me. I could feel its presence, cold and malevolent, closing in. I burst back into the lobby, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The front doors, with their glowing symbols, seemed miles away. I glanced back at the stairwell. The figure was there, its gaunt form silhouetted against the dim light. It was moving slowly, deliberately, its tapping fingers a relentless drumbeat of dread. I knew, with a sickening certainty, that the police wouldn't arrive in time. I was alone in this building, trapped with something that wasn't human, something that was now hunting me. I had to find a way out. What do you think? Should I focus on the protagonist trying to escape the building, or delve deeper into the nature of the entity and the meaning of the symbols? The whispers intensified, becoming a constant, chilling soundtrack to our lives. They slithered into our dreams, twisting familiar lullabies into menacing dirges. The shadows in the corners of the apartment deepened, seeming to writhe and shift with a life of their own. The boys, Yusuf and Omar, grew increasingly withdrawn, their bright eyes now clouded with a perpetual fear. They would cling to us, their small bodies trembling, pointing at empty spaces and whimpering. Amir and I tried everything. We burned sage, hoping to cleanse the apartment of whatever malevolent presence resided within its walls. We consulted with a local imam, who recited prayers and blessed the rooms, but the oppressive feeling remained, a heavy weight pressing down on us. The sinister book, the source of our growing dread, remained hidden in the storage closet, a silent testament to the evil that had taken root in our home. One night, I woke to find Amir missing from our bed. A sliver of light spilled from the hallway, and I followed it. My heart pounding in my chest, I found him in the nursery, standing over Yusuf and Omar's crib, his face pale and drawn. He was holding the leather-bound book, its pages glowing with an unnatural light. "Amir, what are you doing?" I whispered, my voice trembling. He didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the book, a strange, distant look in them. He began to chant in a language I didn't recognize, the words guttural and unsettling. The air in the room grew cold, and the shadows danced wildly. Yusuf and Omar woke up, their screams piercing the silence. The rocking horse in the corner began to sway back and forth, its painted eyes seeming to gleam with malevolent intent. A cold gust of wind swept through the room, extinguishing the lamp and plunging us into darkness. Then, I saw it, a figure coalescing in the corner of the room, tall and gaunt, its form indistinct but undeniably present. 2 red pinpoints of light burned where its eyes should have been. It was the same shadow I had seen before, but this time, it was closer, more real. The figure reached out towards the crib, its long, skeletal fingers stretching towards my babies. I screamed, rushing forward, trying to pull Amir away from the book. But he was like a statue, his body rigid, his eyes glazed over, the whispers intensified, becoming a deafening roar in my ears. The figure drew closer, its red eyes fixed on Yusuf and Omar. I felt a surge of primal fear, a mother's instinct to protect her children. I grabbed the book from Amir's hands and hurled it across the room. The moment the book left his grasp, Amir gasped, his eyes snapping back into focus. He looked around the room, his face filled with confusion and horror. What happened? The figure recoiled as the book hit the wall, a low, guttural growl emanating from its form. The red eyes flickered, then vanished. The shadows receded, and the room grew still. We grabbed Yusuf and Omar, holding them close, our bodies trembling. We knew then that we couldn't stay in that apartment any longer. It was a battle we couldn't win. We had to escape, to protect our children from the evil that had taken root in our home. We packed our belongings in a frenzy, our movements fueled by fear and desperation. We didn't care about the deposit, about the fresh start we had hoped for. All that mattered was getting out, getting away from the whispers, the shadows, the red eyes. We left in the dead of night, leaving behind the sinister book, the source of our nightmare. As we drove away, I looked back at the apartment building, its windows dark and vacant, like empty eyes staring out into the night. I could have sworn I saw a faint, shadowy figure standing in one of the windows, watching us leave. We never spoke of what happened in that apartment. We tried to forget, to bury the memories deep within us. But sometimes, in the quiet of the night, I would hear the whispers, a faint, chilling reminder of the evil we had escaped, and I would hold my children close, grateful that we had made it out alive, but forever haunted by the nightmare we had left behind. The scent of fresh paint still clung to the air as we carried the last of the boxes into our new apartment. Excitement bubbled within me, a fresh start for our little family, me, my husband Amir, and our 2 beautiful baby boys, Yusuf and Omar. They were only a year apart, a whirlwind of tiny hands and feet, and this felt like the perfect space for them to grow. The first few days were a blur of unpacking and settling in. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating the cheerful, freshly painted walls. Yusuf and Omar gurgled happily in their playpen, seemingly unfazed by the change. Even Amir, usually stoic, seemed lighter, relieved to finally be out of our cramped old place. It started subtly, a floorboard creaking when no one was walking, a faint whisper that I couldn't quite place, like the wind sighing through a crack in the window, even when the windows were closed. I dismissed it as the building settling, old pipes groaning. Then came the nights. Yusuf, usually a sound sleeper, started waking up screaming. Omar, typically placid, would stare wide-eyed at the ceiling, his little body trembling. Amir and I would take turns rocking them, our exhaustion growing with each sleepless night. One evening, as I was putting Omar down, I saw it, a fleeting shadow in the corner of the nursery, tall and gaunt, before it vanished as quickly as it appeared. My heart pounded in my chest. "Amir," I called out, my voice barely a whisper. "Did you see that?" He followed my gaze, his brow furrowed. "See what, John?" I hesitated, not wanting to sound crazy. "A shadow in the corner." He held me close. "You're tired, Habibi. It's just the light playing tricks." But the feeling persisted, a cold spot in the hallway that lingered even on warm days. The distinct scent of dust and something metallic, even after I'd cleaned. And the whispers, they became clearer, closer. Sometimes, I could almost make out words, a low, mournful murmur that seemed to come from within the walls themselves. The boys grew increasingly distressed. They would point at empty spaces, their little faces contorted in fear, babbling in their baby language that now sounded like pleas. One afternoon, Yusuf started frantically banging his hands against the bars of his crib, his eyes fixed on a point behind me. I turned, but there was nothing there. Amir started noticing things too. The way the rocking chair in the living room would sway gently when no one was near it. The faint scratching sounds coming from the ceiling at night. He tried to rationalize it. Drafts, old building noises, but I saw the unease in his eyes. One night, the whispers were so loud, so insistent, that they woke both of us. They seemed to be coming from Yusuf and Omar's room. We rushed in to find them huddled together in their crib, tears streaming down their faces, their eyes wide with terror. As I held Omar close, I heard it clearly. A voice, raspy and chilling, right beside my ear. "They're mine now," I screamed, pulling away, clutching my baby tighter. Amir whirled around, his face pale in the dim light filtering from the hallway. What was that? We started searching the apartment, every corner, every closet. We found nothing, but the oppressive feeling, the sense of being watched, intensified. The air grew heavy, making it hard to breathe. Then, we found it. In the back of a dusty storage closet, tucked beneath a loose floorboard, was a small, leather-bound book. Its pages were filled with strange symbols and unsettling drawings of distorted figures. As Amir carefully turned a page, a lock of dark, brittle hair fell out. A wave of icy dread washed over me. The sweet scent of dust and metal was overpowering in the closet. The whispers seemed to coalesce, forming a single, malevolent voice in my head. "You shouldn't have come here." We knew then. This wasn't just an old building settling. Something was wrong here. Something deeply, terrifyingly wrong. Our new apartment, our fresh start, felt like a trap. And our precious baby boys were in the center of it. As the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to deepen and lengthen, I held my children close, a primal fear gripping my heart. We had moved into a nightmare. The basement below, our new house, was a steal. A sprawling Victorian on the outskirts of town with more rooms than we knew what to do with. The previous owners had left in a hurry. The estate agent mumbled something about unforeseen circumstances, but we were too excited by the space and the price to ask too many questions. The only part of the house that gave me pause was the basement. The door in the kitchen was heavy and solid, secured with a rusty deadbolt. The agent had claimed the key was lost, and the previous owners hadn't used it in years, suggesting it was just a damp, unfinished space best left undisturbed. Of course, that only piqued my curiosity. Weeks passed, filled with unpacking and settling in. But the basement door remained a silent, ominous presence. My younger brother, Leo, always seemed to avoid looking at it, a shadow flickering in his eyes whenever it caught his attention. My parents, busy with work, seemed content to leave it locked. One rainy Saturday, boredom finally overcame my apprehension. I found a set of old lockpicks in the garage, remnants of a youthful fascination I'd long since abandoned. Now, they felt like a grim necessity. It took me the better part of an hour, the rusty mechanism resisting my clumsy attempts. Finally, with a soft click, the deadbolt sprang open. A gust of cold, musty air wafted from beneath the door, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and something else, something acrid and metallic. Leo stood behind me, his face pale. "Are you sure about this, Alara?" "Of course," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Just curious." I pulled the heavy door open, revealing a steep, wooden staircase descending into darkness. The air grew colder, the smell stronger. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen counter. "Stay here," I told Leo, but he shook his head, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. "No way. If you're going down there, I'm going with you." Together, we descended into the gloom. The wooden steps creaked ominously under our weight. The flashlight beam danced across damp stone walls and low-hanging pipes. The basement was indeed unfinished, a labyrinth of shadows and forgotten things. Dust lay thick on everything, We passed stacks of old newspapers, discarded furniture draped in cobwebs, and rows of empty shelves. The air was heavy, pressing in on us. As we ventured deeper, we noticed strange markings scrawled on the concrete walls. They weren't words, but symbols, angular, unsettling shapes that seemed vaguely familiar, though I couldn't place them. The metallic smell grew stronger, and we began to hear a faint dripping sound, echoing in the silence. We followed the sound, our flashlight beam leading us to a far corner of the basement. There, beneath a low archway, was a small, bricked-off section. A rusty pipe ran into the wall, and a dark, viscous liquid was slowly seeping from the cracks in the mortar, forming a small, glistening pool on the floor. The metallic scent was overpowering here. Leo gagged, covering his mouth. "What is that stuff?" I didn't know, but the sight of it sent a shiver of revulsion down my spine. As I shone the flashlight on the bricked-off section, I noticed more of the strange symbols etched into the bricks themselves, surrounding a small, crudely drawn circle. A sudden feeling of intense unease washed over me. This place felt wrong, profoundly wrong. "Let's just go," Leo whispered, tugging on my sleeve. I nodded, my hand already reaching for his. We turned to leave, but then we heard it. A soft, scraping sound, coming from behind the bricked-off wall. We froze, our blood running cold. The scraping continued, a slow, rhythmic sound, like something dragging against stone. "What was that?" Leo breathed, his eyes wide with terror. I didn't answer. We stood there, listening, the silence of the basement amplifying the unsettling sound. Then, the scraping stopped. A moment of tense silence hung in the air. And then, a new sound began. A soft, whimpering noise, like an animal in pain. It seemed to be coming from the same place, behind the bricked-off wall. Curiosity, morbid and terrifying, overcame my fear. I took a hesitant step towards the wall. "Alara, no!" Leo hissed, pulling me back, but I couldn't resist. I had to know what was behind that wall. I moved closer, shining the flashlight on the bricks. One of the bricks near the bottom looked slightly loose. Hesitantly, I reached out and touched it. It wobbled. With a surge of adrenaline, I gripped the brick and pulled. It came away with a dry, grating sound, leaving a small hole in the wall. The whimpering sound was clearer now, laced with a low, guttural moan. A gust of even colder air wafted from the hole, carrying a stench that made my stomach churn, a mix of decay and something indescribably foul. I shone the flashlight into the hole. At first, I saw only darkness. Then, slowly, my eyes adjusted. Inside the bricked-off space, huddled on the damp earth floor, was a figure. It was small and emaciated, its limbs twisted at unnatural angles. Its skin was pale and stretched taut over bone. Matted strands of dark hair clung to its skull. Its eyes, wide and filled with a horrifying mixture of pain and terror, fixed on mine. And from its throat came that whimpering moan, a sound that seemed to claw its way into my soul. Then, its lips, cracked and dry, began to move. It was trying to speak. I leaned closer, straining to hear the faint, raspy sound. "Help." The word hung in the cold, fetid air, sending a wave of nausea through me. But then, the figure's eyes rolled back in its head, and its body began to convulse. A rattling sound escaped its throat, and the whimpering ceased. Leo was tugging frantically on my arm. "Alara, we need to get out of here, now." I couldn't move. I was frozen, staring into the darkness beyond the hole, at the still, contorted form. Then, I saw something else. Scrawled on the dirt floor beside the figure, in what looked like the same dark, viscous substance that was seeping from the wall, were more of those unsettling symbols. And in the center, the same crudely drawn circle. Suddenly, the air in the basement grew heavy, the silence broken by a low, resonant humming that seemed to vibrate through the very foundations of the house. The shadows around us deepened, taking on strange, shifting shapes. The hole in the bricked-off wall seemed to pulse with a faint, inner light. Fear, raw and primal, finally broke through my paralysis. I grabbed Leo's hand, and we turned and fled, scrambling back through the labyrinthine basement, the humming growing louder behind us. We didn't stop until we burst back into the relative normalcy of the kitchen, slamming and deadbolting the basement door behind us. We stood there, panting, our hearts pounding in unison. The image of the figure in the darkness seared into my mind. We told our parents everything, but they dismissed it as our overactive imaginations, fueled by the creepy old house. But I knew what I had seen. I knew what we had heard. That night, the humming started again. Faint at first, but growing steadily louder, seeming to emanate from the locked basement door. The floorboards beneath our feet vibrated with the low, resonant sound. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside the window, sent shivers down our spines. As the days turned into weeks, the humming persisted, a constant, unsettling undercurrent to our lives in the Victorian house. Sometimes, we would hear faint scratching sounds coming from behind the basement door, and occasionally, a muffled whimper. We tried to ignore it, to pretend it wasn't happening. But the knowledge of what lay hidden beneath our feet, the image of those terrified eyes in the darkness, haunted our waking hours and filled our nightmares. One night, I woke to find Leo standing by my bed, his face illuminated by the pale moonlight filtering through the window. His eyes were wide with terror. "Ilara," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I can hear it. It's calling my name." I sat up, straining to hear. At first, there was only the familiar hum. But then, beneath it, I heard it, a faint, raspy whisper, just at the edge of hearing. "Leo!" The sound seemed to be coming from the basement. We huddled together, terrified, as the whispering grew louder, more insistent, weaving its way through the silence of the night. We knew then that we couldn't ignore it any longer. Whatever was trapped in the basement wanted out, and it was starting to call for us. What do you think? Should I continue with them trying to understand what's in the basement and why it's calling to Leo? Or focus on the entity trying to escape? This could lead to more intense horror elements. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind where the sun slanted through the living room window, painting dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, frantic ghosts. Mom and Dad were hours away at a conference in Islamabad, a rare overnight trip that had initially felt like a thrilling adventure. A whole house to ourselves. Now, as the shadows outside began to lengthen, a knot of unease tightened in my stomach. My sister, Sarah, perched on the edge of the worn armchair, her eyes glued to her phone. She was 15, 2 years my senior, and usually the picture of unflappable teenage cool. But even she seemed a little off. Her usual stream of sarcastic commentary was absent, replaced by a nervous energy that made her leg bounce incessantly. "Everything okay?" I asked, my voice a little too loud in the oppressive quiet. She jumped, her phone nearly slipping from her grasp. "Yeah, fine. Just bored." Bored? Sarah was never just bored. She always had a book, a movie, a friend, texting. Bored was code for something else, something I could feel echoing in the stillness of the house. I wandered over to the window, peering out at our familiar street. Mrs. Khan was tending her roses next door, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the muted tones inside. A delivery van rumbled past in the distance, the sound briefly puncturing the silence before it swallowed everything again. Everything seemed normal outside, so why did it feel like the air inside was thick, with something unseen, something waiting? The feeling had started subtly a few hours ago. A floorboard creaking when no one was walking, a shadow flickering at the edge of my vision, the faint scent of something metallic that came and went like a phantom breeze. I'd tried to brush it off, attributing it to an overactive imagination fueled by the horror movie marathon Sarah and I had indulged in the previous weekend. But the feeling persisted, growing stronger with each passing hour. The first truly unsettling thing happened around 3 o'clock. I was in the kitchen, making us a snack of toast and Nutella, when I heard it, a soft, rhythmic thumping coming from upstairs. It wasn't loud, more like a gentle knocking against a wall, but it was persistent and undeniably inside the house. "Sarah, do you hear that?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. She appeared in the doorway, her brow furrowed. "Hear what? The TV? No, listen." I held my breath, straining to hear over the low hum of the refrigerator. There it was again. Thump, thump, thump. Sarah's eyes widened slightly. "Yeah, what is that?" We stood there for a minute, two figures frozen in the afternoon sunlight, listening to the strange, steady beat emanating from the upper floor. Our parents had a strict rule. The attic was off limits. It was dusty, filled with old furniture draped in white sheets like ghostly figures, and Dad always said it wasn't safe. The thumping seemed to be coming from directly above the living room, right under the attic. "Maybe it's just the wind?" Sarah suggested, though her voice lacked conviction. "There's no wind," I replied, pointing to the still leaves outside the window. Hesitantly, Sarah started towards the stairs. "Well, let's just check it out." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Are you crazy? What if it's something? What something could it be?" "A ghost that likes to tap dance?" she said, attempting a weak joke, but her usual bravado was missing. We crept up the stairs, each step creaking loudly in the silence. The thumping continued, a steady, unsettling rhythm that seemed to sync with the frantic beat of my own heart. As we reached the landing, the air grew noticeably colder. A shiver traced its way down my spine. The attic door, usually closed tight, was slightly ajar. A sliver of darkness beckoned from within. The thumping seemed louder here, more insistent. Sarah and I exchanged a nervous glance. Neither of us wanted to be the one to push the door open. The old house stood on a small hill, overlooking the town, its darkened windows like vacant eyes staring out at the world. My friend Ben had inherited it from a distant relative, and we'd come up for the weekend, eager to explore its dusty rooms and forgotten history. I was more excited than Ben, who seemed to carry a perpetual air of unease about the place. The first day was mostly spent clearing out cobwebs and opening creaky windows to air out the musty smell. By nightfall, the house felt marginally less oppressive, though a certain chill lingered in the air, clinging to the shadows. That evening, after a dinner of microwaved pizza, Ben retreated to his book downstairs, while I decided to explore the attic. The narrow staircase leading up was steep and dark, the wood groaning under my weight. The air grew colder with each step, carrying the scent of dried leaves and something else, something faintly sweet, like decaying flowers. The attic was a large, dusty space filled with forgotten relics draped in white sheets. Moonlight filtered through the single, grimy window at the far end, casting long, eerie shadows that danced with the slightest movement. I wandered through the silent space, lifting the edges of sheets to reveal antique furniture, stacks of yellowed books, and a collection of porcelain dolls with vacant stares. It had a melancholic, almost mournful atmosphere, like a place where memories had come to rest. The attic window drew my attention. It was small and grimy, but the moonlight filtering through it offered a view of the darkened landscape outside. As I approached it, I noticed something odd. Etched into the glass, almost invisible beneath the grime, was a single word: listen. A shiver traced its way down my spine. It felt strangely deliberate, like a message left for someone. I rubbed the dusty glass, trying to make out if there were other markings, but found nothing. I turned away from the window, a growing sense of unease settling in. The silence of the attic seemed to deepen, pressing in on me. The shadows seemed to shift and writhe in my peripheral vision. Then I heard it, a faint scratching sound, coming from somewhere within the attic walls. It was a soft, insistent sound, like tiny claws scraping against wood. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. The scratching stopped. The silence returned, heavy and expectant. I told myself it was just mice, the old house settling. But the sound had felt deliberate. I started to make my way back towards the stairs, wanting to rejoin Ben downstairs. But as I passed a large, draped shape in the center of the attic, I heard the scratching again, closer this time. It seemed to be coming from underneath the sheet. My heart pounded in my chest. Slowly, hesitantly, I reached out and pulled back the edge of the sheet. Beneath it was an old, ornate mirror, its surface clouded with dust. The scratching seemed to be coming from behind the glass. I stared at the mirror, my breath catching in my throat. The moonlight, reflecting off its dusty surface, showed only my own pale face, distorted and framed by shadows. Then, I saw it. A flicker of movement within the reflection, behind my own image. Something dark and indistinct, shifting in the shadows. I froze, my eyes wide with a sudden, cold dread. I hadn't moved. There was nothing behind me but the dusty attic space. Slowly, cautiously, I turned around. Nothing. Just the draped furniture and the silent shadows. I turned back to the mirror. The dark shape was still there in the reflection, closer now. It seemed to be coalescing. Panic began to rise within me. This wasn't right. Mirrors didn't show things that weren't there. I took a step back, my hand reaching out to steady myself against a nearby table. The scratching started again, louder now, more frantic. It felt like something was trying to break through the glass. In the reflection, the dark shape began to take on a more defined form. It was tall and thin, its limbs elongated and spindly. Its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and two dark, empty sockets stared back at me from within the reflection. My breath hitched in my throat. This wasn't my reflection. I stumbled backward, knocking over a stack of old books that crashed to the floor with a loud thud. The sound echoed in the silence. momentarily drowning out the scratching. I didn't take my eyes off the mirror. The figure in the reflection was moving now, its long, skeletal fingers reaching out towards the glass, towards me. Terror, primal and absolute, seized me. I had to get out of the attic. I turned and fled, stumbling through the darkness, blindly making my way towards the narrow staircase. The scratching followed me, growing louder, more insistent, as if the thing in the mirror was trying to break free. I didn't dare to look back. I scrambled down the stairs, my feet slipping on the worn wood. I burst into the living room, gasping for breath, my heart pounding like a drum against my ribs. Ben looked up from his book, his brow furrowed with concern. "What's wrong?" "You look like you've seen a ghost. There's something in the attic," I choked out, my voice trembling. "In the mirror." Ben looked at me skeptically. "A mirror? What are you talking about?" But he could see the genuine terror in my eyes. He stood up, his own face paling slightly. "Okay, let's go see." He picked up a heavy poker from beside the fireplace, his hand gripping it tightly. Together, we started back towards the stairs, the silence of the house broken only by our hesitant footsteps. As we ascended, the air grew colder again. The scent of decaying flowers was stronger here. When we reached the attic landing, the scratching sound was gone. The attic door stood slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness beckoning from within. Ben pushed the door open slowly, holding the poker ready. We stepped inside, our flashlights cutting through the dusty gloom. The attic was silent. The draped furniture stood motionless in the shadows. The moonlight filtered through the grimy window, illuminating the word "Listen" etched into the glass. The ornate mirror lay on the floor, face down, the sheet that had covered it now crumpled beside it. Ben and I exchanged a bewildered glance. "There was nothing here. Maybe it was just your imagination," Ben said hesitantly, but I knew what I had seen. I knew what I had felt. The terror was still raw. The image of those empty eyes in the reflection burned into my mind. We searched the attic thoroughly, but found nothing out of the ordinary. No sign of anything that could have made the scratching sound. No explanation for the terrifying figure in the mirror. We went back downstairs, the unease lingering in the air. Ben tried to reassure me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something in that attic had seen me, had tried to reach me through the reflection. Later that night, as we tried to sleep in the unfamiliar silence of the old house, I couldn't shake the image of the attic window, the word "listen," a silent warning etched in the glass. And every time I closed my eyes, I saw the reflection, the dark figure reaching out, its empty gaze fixed on me. The old house stood silent on the hill, its darkened windows staring out at the night. And somewhere, in the dusty stillness of the attic, a mirror lay face down, waiting. What do you think of this story? Would you like me to continue with what might happen the next day? Or perhaps explore the history of the house and the meaning of the word etched on the window? Aiming for a sustained sense of dread and a disturbing, evolving mystery. The Whispering Museum. The Blackwood Museum stood at the edge of town, a hulking Victorian structure that had been closed to the public for decades. Locals whispered stories about it. Tales of strange occurrences, unexplained noises, and a pervasive sense of sorrow that clung to its decaying walls. My friend Liam, a paranormal enthusiast with a penchant for the macabre, had finally managed to secure permission to spend a night inside, hoping to document any supernatural activity. He'd convinced me, against my better judgment, to join him. The heavy oak doors groaned as Liam wrestled them open, revealing a cavernous entrance hall shrouded in shadows and the thick scent of dust and decay. Moonlight filtered through the grimy skylight, illuminating rows of shrouded exhibits, statues draped in white sheets like ghostly figures, glass cases filled with unseen artifacts. An immediate sense of unease settled over me. The air felt heavy, stagnant, and the silence was profound, broken only by our own hesitant footsteps. It wasn't just the quiet of an empty building. It felt like a silence that was listening. As we ventured deeper into the museum, Liam, armed with his EMF meter and audio recorder, was practically buzzing with excitement. I, on the other hand, felt a growing knot of anxiety in my stomach. Each creaking floorboard, each rustle of unseen fabric, sent a shiver down my spine. The museum was a labyrinth of dimly lit galleries, each dedicated to a different, forgotten aspect of local history. We passed exhibits on old farming tools, faded photographs of stern-faced townsfolk, and dusty displays of antique clothing. But it was the final gallery, tucked away at the end of a long, shadowy corridor, that truly unnerved me. The sign above the arched doorway simply read, "The Curiosities." Inside, the air was noticeably colder. The moonlight barely penetrated the grime-covered windows, leaving the room shrouded in near darkness. The exhibits here were unsettling. A collection of strange, taxidermied creatures with unnatural features, antique medical instruments that looked like torture devices, and glass cases containing bizarre, unidentifiable objects. As Liam fiddled with his equipment, I found myself drawn to a large, ornate mirror hanging on the far wall. Its surface was clouded with age, but in the dim light, I could just make out my own pale reflection. As I stared into it, I had the fleeting sensation that something else was looking back. I blinked, and the feeling was gone. "Liam, this place gives me the creeps," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "That's the spirit," he replied, his eyes glued to the readings on his EMF meter. "Anything unusual?" "Just a feeling." We continued our exploration, moving to the upper floors. The grand staircase creaked ominously with each step, the shadows lengthening and distorting familiar shapes into menacing figures. Upstairs, the galleries were filled with more unsettling artifacts, ancient masks with grotesque expressions, tribal carvings that seemed to writhe in the dim light, and portraits of long-dead individuals whose eyes seemed to follow us as we moved. In one room, dedicated to local folklore, we found a display case containing a collection of small, intricately carved wooden dolls. Their faces were disturbingly lifelike, their eyes black and hollow. As I looked at them, I could have sworn I heard a faint whispering sound, too soft to be real. "Did you hear that?" I asked Liam, who was adjusting his audio recorder. "Hear what?" "Just the old house settling, I think." But the whispering persisted, a low, sibilant murmur that seemed to come from all around us. It was too indistinct to make out any words, but it carried a palpable sense of malice. As the night deepened, the activity seemed to increase. The EMF meter flickered erratically in certain areas. We captured strange, disembodied sounds on the audio recorder, faint whispers, soft footsteps when no one was walking, and once, a chilling, childlike giggle that seemed to echo from the empty halls. Liam was ecstatic, convinced we were on the verge of a significant paranormal event. I, however, was growing increasingly terrified. The oppressive atmosphere of the museum felt like it was closing in on us, and the unseen presence felt less like a curious spirit, and more like something malevolent. Around 3 in the morning, we found ourselves back in the entrance hall. The moonlight had shifted, casting long, skeletal shadows across the floor. The air was colder than ever, and the whispering had become a constant, unsettling drone. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors we had entered through slammed shut with a deafening boom, plunging the hall into near total darkness. "Liam?" I called out, my voice trembling. "The wind must have caught it," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. He fumbled for his flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness. As he swept it across the doors, we saw something that made our blood run cold. Scratched into the aged wood, as if by long, sharp fingernails, were words. Not random scratches, but deliberate letters, forming a chilling message. "Get out." The whispering intensified, seeming to come from the very walls themselves. The temperature in the hall plummeted, and we could see our breath misting in the air. Panic began to set in. We tried to open the doors, but they were jammed shut, as if bolted from the outside. We were trapped. Liam's bravado finally cracked. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. "We need to get out of here," he stammered. We tried the other doors leading out of the entrance hall, but they were all locked or blocked. The whispering was growing louder, more insistent, and we could now make out individual words, though they were slurred and distorted, filled with a chilling hatred. "Yours. Belong. Here." We retreated further into the museum, the beam of Liam's flashlight our only guide through the oppressive darkness. The whispering followed us, seeming to echo from the shadows themselves. As we moved through the silent galleries, the shrouded exhibits seemed to shift and sway. The eyes of the portraits seemed to gleam in the darkness, and from the room of dolls we heard that faint, chilling giggle again, closer this time. We found ourselves back in the gallery of curiosities. The ornate mirror on the far wall seemed to shimmer in the dim light. The whispering was loudest here, a chorus of hateful voices swirling around us. Suddenly, the reflection in the mirror changed. It was no longer just our own pale faces staring back. Behind us, in the reflection, stood figures, tall, gaunt shapes shrouded in shadow, their eyes glowing with a malevolent light. They were reaching out, their long, skeletal fingers outstretched. We whirled around, but there was nothing there. Just the dusty exhibits and the oppressive darkness. We turned back to the mirror, and the figures in the reflection were closer now, their silent, hateful gaze fixed on us. The whispering intensified, becoming a deafening roar. Liam screamed, dropping his flashlight. We stumbled backward, away from the mirror, our hands outstretched in the darkness. We could feel a cold presence surrounding us, the air thick with a sense of ancient malice. We could hear soft footsteps approaching from the shadows, the rustling of unseen fabric. Something cold and skeletal brushed against my hand. I recoiled. A scream caught in my throat. We were no longer alone in the Blackwood Museum. The whispers had become a tangible presence, and the curiosities were coming to life. The last thing I saw before the darkness consumed me was the reflection in the ornate mirror, the gaunt figures reaching out, their glowing eyes filled with a hunger that promised a fate far worse than death. And the whispering finally clear, a chorus of voices chanting our names, welcoming us to our eternal stay. The still broadcast. Our town, Havenwood, was small and isolated, nestled deep in a valley where the reception for radio and television had always been spotty at best. So when a new, powerful radio tower was erected just outside of town, promising crystal-clear broadcasts, it was met with widespread enthusiasm. Finally, we'd be able to tune in without the constant static and fading signals. Initially, everything was as promised. The local station, WHVN, came in perfectly, playing a mix of easy listening and local news. But after a few weeks, strange things started happening. It began subtly. Late at night, after the regular programming had ended and the station was supposedly off the air, some of us started hearing a faint broadcast. It wasn't music or talk. It was a low, continuous hum, punctuated by occasional static and what sounded like distant whispers. At first, people dismissed it as interference or a malfunctioning transmitter. But more and more residents began reporting the same phenomenon. The still broadcast, as it came to be known, only aired in the dead of night after midnight, and it was always the same, the unsettling hum and the barely audible whispers. My neighbor, Mrs. Gable, a sweet elderly woman, swore she heard her name whispered in the static. Old Mr. Abernathy, a retired mechanic known for his skepticism, claimed the hum made his teeth vibrate. I initially didn't hear anything myself, but one particularly still night, as I lay in bed, a faint, low hum permeated the silence of my room. It was barely perceptible, but it was there, a subtle vibration in the air. I strained my ears, trying to decipher the faint crackling that accompanied it, but I couldn't make out any distinct sounds. The still broadcast became a topic of hushed conversations around town. Some speculated it was a secret government transmission. Others whispered about alien signals. Liam, my best friend and the town's resident conspiracy theorist, was convinced it was a form of subliminal messaging. As the weeks passed, the still broadcast seemed to grow stronger, more pervasive. It started bleeding into the daytime hours, a faint undercurrent beneath the regular programming. The local DJs seemed oblivious, their cheerful voices cutting through the unsettling hum as if it didn't exist. Then came the changes in people, subtle at first, almost imperceptible. A growing sense of apathy, a lack of interest in their usual hobbies, a certain blankness in their eyes. Mrs. Gable stopped tending her beloved garden. Mr. Abernathy left his prized vintage car untouched in the garage. I started feeling it too, a creeping lethargy, a disinclination to do anything beyond the bare minimum. The world seemed to lose its color, the things I once enjoyed now feeling dull and uninteresting. Maya, my younger sister, was the first to voice a more disturbing observation. "They're listening," she said one evening, her voice small and filled with a strange certainty. "Everyone. They're always listening." I tried to reassure her, telling her it was just the strange atmosphere in town getting to her. But I couldn't shake the feeling that she might be right. People seemed more withdrawn, their conversations stilted and brief, their attention often drifting as if they were listening to something else, something only they could hear. One afternoon, while driving through town, I noticed a group of people standing silently on Main Street, their heads slightly tilted, their eyes unfocused. It was as if they were all tuned into the same silent frequency. A wave of unease washed over me. I tried to talk to my parents about what was happening, about the still broadcast and the changes in the townspeople, but they just looked at me with a strange, distant expression, their responses vague and dismissive. "Everything is fine, dear," my mother said, her voice flat, her eyes lacking their usual warmth. You're just imagining things. It was becoming harder to discern what was real and what wasn't. The still broadcast seemed to be seeping into my waking hours, a constant low hum in the background of my thoughts. The whispers were becoming more distinct, though I still couldn't quite make out the words. But they felt personal. Liam, usually so full of wild theories, had become quiet and withdrawn. When I tried to talk to him about the still broadcast, he just stared blankly ahead, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. "It's all so clear now," he murmured, his voice distant. "They're showing us the way." Fear began to grip me, cold and insistent. I felt like I was the only one who could still hear the hum for what it was. Something wrong, something insidious. One night I couldn't sleep. The still broadcast was particularly strong, a resonant drone that filled my entire being. The whispers were louder now, swirling around me like unseen voices. I pressed my hands against my ears, trying to block them out, but it was no use. They seemed to be coming from inside my own head. I got out of bed and walked to the window, looking out at the silent town bathed in the pale moonlight. The streetlights hummed with a strange intensity, and the shadows seemed to writhe and shift. Then I saw them. People were emerging from their houses, slowly, silently. They walked with a strange, vacant gait, their heads tilted upwards as if listening to something in the sky. Their eyes were wide and empty, reflecting the cold moonlight. They moved towards the center of town, a silent procession drawn by an unseen force. Among them were Mrs. Gable, Mr. Abernathy, and even my own parents. Terror seized me. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that the still broadcast wasn't just a malfunction. It was a signal, and the people of Havenwood were answering its call. I looked up at the sky, searching for the source. The stars seemed to pulse with a strange, rhythmic light, and a faint, high-pitched whine seemed to emanate from the newly erected radio tower just outside of town. The whispers in my head grew louder, clearer. I could almost make out the words now, a chorus of voices speaking in unison. "Join us. Listen. Become." I stumbled back from the window, my hands clamped over my ears. I had to get out of Havenwood. I had to escape the still broadcast before it consumed me too. But as I turned to flee, I saw Maya standing in the doorway, her eyes wide and vacant, a faint smile on her lips. "It's time to listen, Liam," she said, her voice flat and toneless. "They're waiting for us." And behind her I could hear it, the low, pervasive hum, no longer just an external sound, but a vibration deep within my own skull. The whispers were clear now, welcoming me to the silent, waiting fold. The still broadcast had finally found its new listener.